Welcome to the Tuesday, September 9th Board of Education meeting, or I should say the continuation of this meeting. The board has been in closed session since 7 o'clock this evening to discuss employment of employee. We have 7 board members present, none absent. And please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now for the very best part of any Board of Education meeting, student recognition. Mr. Purnell?
It's really a pleasure this evening to once again recognize the work of students and the staff at York Community High School in the Family and Consumer Science Department. They recently participated in the National STAR events, students taking action with recognition in San Antonio, Texas over the summer, and we're proud to announce we had some winners. And I'm going to introduce Wendy Albert to do the honors this evening. Wendy?
Thank you. My name is Wendy Albert. I'm the chair for Technology and Applied Arts at York High School. I'd like to thank the school board and Superintendent Purnell for recognizing the accomplishments of our FCCLA students this evening. I'd also like to thank my fellow FCCLA advisors, the Family and Consumer Science teachers at York, as well as our parents and chaperones who have helped our students with their competition season. Students, if you could come on forward. So as they're doing that, I'll just give you a little background about FCCLA. Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America is a national student leadership organization for students involved in family and consumer science classes. At York, our students are involved in a number of different activities, including leadership, conferences, and competitions. And so our students who are before you today have competed at the regional level, they competed at the state level. From the state level, they qualified to move on to the national level, which, as Superintendent Purnell said, was in San Antonio, Texas this past July. So our students competed in 2 different events. The interior design competition requires students to create interior design boards to meet a defined client problem. This year's design problem involved designing a model home for a developer. And the students designed a craftsman-style 2-story home it was geared towards the empty nester market, but they also had to keep the multi-generational family in mind as well, so it would be appealing to a wide range of buyers. Students had to select furniture, design all of the interior rooms, draft the floor plans for both the first and second floors of the home, as well as the porch, and then they also needed to draft the exterior elevation of the home. So you can see, I had them bring their design boards. You can see the work that goes into this over the course of the school year. They receive comments and feedback from the judges after their presentation, their oral presentation at the competition, and they're able to kind of tweak their designs going forward. So congratulations to our team of Daisy Kano and Kaylee Schwartz, who received gold medals in the interior design competition. This is also their second year at the national level. Congratulations, girls. The second event is the fashion design competition. In this event, students design a clothing label for a target market of their choice. They showcase design sketches in a portfolio along with information about the designs ranging from the fabric type, the care for the fabric. They need to have knowledge of the design as well as production costs for each of the designs. So they're basically creating a whole clothing line. And all of that information, the sketches and everything goes into their portfolio. They then also have to create one flat pattern, and they actually have to execute one of the designs for their line. And I was really hoping that Ella would bring one of her designs, but the batteries weren't charged. And so Ella's design, it's called Transforming Beauty. So her line features garments that have electrical components inside of them that transform the garment. So you'll literally see a dress that goes from long to short, or from long to asymmetrical, electrical. So she has all of these awesome designs with all of these clever and innovative ways. And then she actually has, with the help of her brother, worked on the electrical components so that the designs actually transform for you. So we would have actually gotten to see that if it had been charged and ready to go. But her designs were awesome. They wowed the judges. She earned a gold medal in the fashion design competition. And then she also ranked third in the nation overall for her innovative line. Congratulations, Ella. With that competition, she also earned some scholarship money through the Art Institute's fashion design program as well. So really hoping she continues on with that in the future. Congratulations to all of our students and to their advisor, Mrs. Merrick, for their accomplishments throughout this past school year.
Don't go anywhere. While we're taking a look at the storyboards here, I just want to point out that there are a lot of communities that don't provide their students with this kind of opportunity because they don't fund and support the comprehensive high school model. And to me, the comprehensive high school model that we run here in District 205 is invaluable, and I will make a prediction that we're going to see some of these kids for generations to come on the national scene. So let me read a proclamation. Whereas Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America, FCCLA, is a dynamic and effective national student organization that helps young men and women become leaders and address important personal, family, work, and societal issues through family and consumer sciences education. And whereas FCCLA programs and competitions enrich student learning, improve self-esteem, and serve students with a range of ability levels, economic situations, and cultural influences. And whereas York Community High School family and consumer science students recently participated in STAR events. STAR stands for Students Taking Action with Recognition, at the 70th Annual Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America 2014 National Leadership Conference in San Antonio, Texas, from July 6th through July 10th. And whereas approximately 3,600 students advanced from local, regional, and state level of STAR events to the national contest, and whereas in July, the following York Community High School students earned medals in the national competition. Ella DeGregorio, class of 2015, received a gold medal and ranked third overall in the nation in interior design competition. And Kaylee Schwartz and Daisy Kano, class of 2015, received gold medals in the interior design senior category. And whereas these accomplishments bring pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to our community. Now therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and Administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express congratulations to these students, their parents, and Family and Consumer Sciences Department Chair Wendy Elbert, as well as teacher and advisor Sarah Merrick, for their outstanding achievements. Congratulations to you all. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to hand one of these to each, and then I'm going to ask you guys to turn around and shake the whole board. Congratulations. Congratulations. I do have one question about the electrical dress when it rains. we'll go into that later.
Let me just add, too, I want to thank the parents that traveled with the students to San Antonio, Texas. These students could not have taken the trip without the parents acting as chaperones and guides going down there. So parents, thank you very much for filling in and making sure those students got there. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
All summer, I've been encouraging people to stick around and see what the Board of Education does, but we're back in the school year, so I'm encouraging you guys to go home and get the rest of your homework done.
I have one more recognition, if I may, that just came in just this morning, as a matter of fact, and I apologize it's not being on the agenda, but I think this is really good news. You may not know this, but the Illinois State Board of Education of the Governor's Office for Early Childhood Development, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, and the Illinois Department of Human Resources had created an evaluation program this year, the first ever, in evaluating preschool programs across the state of Illinois, and it's called the Circle of Quality. They have developed a number of standards, and they have gone out this past year and evaluated a number of preschool programs across the state based on these new standards that have been in place for just a little over a year and a half, 2 years. They used the National Louis University department to do the monitoring. They actually visited sites, evaluated the quality of the program for students in ages 3 through 5. And I am proud to announce that Madison has been awarded the gold standard for preschool programs. That is the highest standard any preschool program can get in the state of Illinois. It's called the Gold Circle of Quality, and a certificate and the award will be presented at a future date from the Illinois Network of Child Care Resources and Referral Agencies. So I want to offer congratulations to Susan Conrad and the Madison faculty for doing a really outstanding job on a really quality program that we already know is a quality program, but it's nice to be recognized statewide. So.
Next on our agenda is public comments. I have no blue sheets of paper indicating anyone wants to speak, but if that's incorrect, please raise your hand. Be happy to have you come talk to us. Hearing none, then let's move on to Superintendent's communication. Superintendent Pernod.
Let me start. We're going to switch this up a little bit because our presenter hasn't arrived yet for the bond market options update. So let's jump to B, PTA Council topics. One of the things that we had talked about doing, and Jim presented this at the first PTA Council meeting, was using the PTA presidents and the council as a sounding board for a variety of topics that the Board of Education and the administration may want to vet as ideas before we get into depth on any one idea, and to receive feedback from the PTAs on any topic that we think would be worth pursuing. I did this last year when it came to the staggered start time last year of trying to decide whether that was worthwhile to pursue or not. I put that out to the PTA Council and used them as a sounding board. The information came back, and we partly based our decision on that feedback. So I think it's a valuable tool for us to utilize. Jim presented to them that we would be interested in presenting future topics to them. The interest tonight is to see what topics you may think are appropriate to go to the PTA Council for further feedback. And so we want to spend some time tonight just brainstorming with the board what other topics. We have put out, Jim announced the stormwater topic, and they are pursuing that as we speak, getting info back from each local school's PTA council, and they'll report back at a future council on the results of their findings as they go to each building. So Jim, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, let me add just two things. First of all, there's 8 or 9 of these meetings. We don't have to come up with 8 or 9 topics this evening. 1 or 2 would be great. From attending the curriculum committee meeting, I think there's going to be plenty of topics that the curriculum committee may want some feedback from. I would think finance and operations has, as the year goes on, some things that they might want to bounce off of an informed and involved constituency. So it's not like we have to come up with them all tonight. But just keep it in mind as the year goes by. And as our committees want feedback on things, just bring it to the board and we'll send it to the PTA Council to bring to all the PTAs for some feedback. The other thing the PTA Council asked regarding stormwater was 2 or 3 specific questions that they could ask their membership. And I sent a note out to the board, and I think the consensus was, why don't we work as a group right now to come up with those questions? So if we can kind of spend 5 minutes right now on the stormwater questions, and then if anybody has any ideas they'd like, that they'd like to present for other topics to bring to the PTA Council, that'd be great. I just think that the more feedback we can get, the better our plans and the better received they'll be in the community. So, on the topic of stormwater, I think question number 1 is, do you support the idea of using school land to temporarily store stormwater? That's simple enough, and then of course it's the details that cause the problem. Would you support using fields which PE classes are taught on, or that are recreational for students? John, I'm just looking for feedback, so jump in.
There's a lot of technical information that goes into that. And so, that's one of the reasons there are these engineering firms and, all these standards and so forth out there. I think it would be helpful to probably see if there's something we can get to guide the conversation on those technical issues. You ask people, well, do you want them to flood your PE area? They're going to say no. But there is some technical information to be considered about, okay, what will be the impact? What type of impact is anticipated? What are the means of reducing or addressing the impact and so forth. So on that particular one, I think there needs to be some information provided. We had talked about retaining the consultant that had reviewed the city's plans for the park district as a way of cost savings, a little less overview on that. And I'm wondering if that person could kind of walk through the more technical aspects of that before heading into that session to make sure that, some of the things that are out there can be funneled into an appropriate factual context on that.
Chris?
I think at a higher level, what you're asking is the same question I had, which, and maybe this is we're doing this early and kind of backwards. I think we're going to have a discussion about kind of where we are and then leading to where we're going. And the city has asked us to help, and we've been helping for over a year now. The issue being that they dropped a set of conceptual drawings in front of us that they hadn't consulted with us on nor reflected our needs from a facilities and a long-term planning standpoint. We have worked with them over the past year to help them understand our needs and to select properties to focus on, with the idea being 2 things. Number 1, we needed actual plan to talk about beyond a conceptual drawing, and we needed to negotiate an intergovernmental agreement. And when you have those 2 things, now you've got something concrete that you can go talk to somebody about. Right now, I think what John's conversation kind of reflects is that you got nothing more than a piece of paper that's got a drawing on it at this point that says, we think the water comes in here and goes out there. We actually had our engineers look at what we could do at Madison. We gave, if we were to have to double the size of that facility, I think we've had this conversation, that drawing was done back in March, so we have been helping and working with them till then. We shared that with them back in March, and they said, can our engineer look at this and we'll get back to you, and that was the last we'd heard. But, so the point being that we don't know what the picture looks like. We don't know what we're asking the PTA to evaluate. At this stage, your question makes sense. As far as just in concept, being a good partner, do you have any issues? What are your concerns that should be reflected in our agreement? But as it relates to actually evaluating a concept, there is no concept to evaluate. It's 1 page. And what I thought we had always done in the working kind of the way we were working together was to put more meat on that bone, to define what it was, so that we could explain it better to our constituents. And I thought we were always working towards that. I'm not sure where this letter from the city came out, because it's actually after we've been working for a year now. They're asking us to help and work with them. So we have been cooperating. We have been doing this. And again, I would fully support continuing to cooperate and to do this. But there's no plan to vote on. They're asking us to vote on our proposal. There is no proposal. There's a picture. There's a conceptual drawing. If we want to work together to develop engineered plans that start to address the technical details, to flesh out the key terms of a intergovernmental agreement, to allow us to define that, then to share that with our constituencies, I'm all for that. But to John's point, until we have something concrete, it's going to be very hard to ask the question. So I guess that's where I'm kind of coming from with the PTAs. I think at a high level, what is your position? What do the different folks within our constituent group feel about this concept? What are the key issues that they have with it that we would like us to reflect? But beyond that, I don't think we have anything to talk about just yet.
Emily?
If you wanted to go to the PTAs with questions about stormwater, I mean, you could ask them, number one, are you aware about this discussion going on? How would you be interested in getting email updates? Should we, dedicate a part of our website with this information? Would you like to hear about it through the PTAs? I mean, we could ask them about how they would like, once we have more meat on the bone, as Chris said, how they would like to hear about it or weigh in on it. Because I know the Park District has handled it a little differently about how they have information available. They've had some meetings and on their website. So I don't know if maybe that's something we could ask the PTAs if they would be interested in getting information either through the website or through PTA meetings once we have more than just a drawing to show them.
We could narrow it down a little bit just by asking their thoughts about Madison. It seems that's where the discussions are centering around the use of, water detention at the Madison site. The other sites are more secondary, so you could use that school and to ask the initial question, what do they think about that at Madison?
And I do think we need to put something out there and ask what are their thoughts. Because prior to creating or crafting this intergovernmental agreement, which I think is important before we can do anything else, I think we need to have some understanding of what we're doing and what we're asking each other to buy in and support. But I think we'll get some good ideas from our community on what some of their concerns are, what some of their thoughts are, and we can add that information into our intergovernmental agreement. So I actually am supportive of putting a general question out there of what are your thoughts on this?
Erin?
I would make sure that we ask what their expectations are. Because I think that as people talk to me, there's a lot of different thoughts out there. And I'm not sure that they're all the same. And so what I would like to understand is what are their expectations, and then what do we have to make sure that we cover as a governmental body from a education standpoint and a facilities standpoint for today's footprint as well as future needs that we know are coming up, and that they understand all of those aspects. And it's more of a richer, fuller conversation about, yes, we want things, but do you understand all of the implications if we go down this path? And I think that there are some people that expect this to solve their problems, and it doesn't. And so I think we need to be very clear on that. And it's not our responsibility, but if we talk to our constituents, we need to understand that and represent that for them.
Emily?
But, I mean, this gets back to, who's going to these meetings and asking? It's going to be the PTA presidents, right? So are you saying they need to go explain everything that you just said? I mean, that's not really going to happen. I mean, and John said if you just say, do you want to flood the fields at your children's school with stormwater, the answer is going to be no. But do they see the engineering drawing? Do they understand that the soil will be replaced with sand that, you know, drains quickly? Or, I mean, like, you can't just ask a general question, but you also can't say, give them all the details that you mentioned.
If I can just summarize just what I've heard so far, it sounds like this is a two-step process. Some very general questions to begin with. Once the city comes back to us with more detailed proposals, bring those detailed proposals back to the PTAs and you know, in whatever fashion. We won't go into the logistics of that. But one question that was presented here: what are the key issues that concern you? And as we negotiate an intergovernmental agreement, you know, there may be a lot of things out in the community that none of us have thought of. And I'd certainly like to capture that. And then, you know, these probably need a little work to come up with a good, concise question. But, you know, are you aware of the ongoing discussion? And how would you like to receive future information about the topic? You know, how do you feel about the topic, I think goes hand in hand with what your key issues that concern you. And then, Karen, you had a question. What are your expectations? I think we just need to complete that sentence, though.
So for example, sometimes I hear from people that this is going to solve my problem. And then they get some more detail or conversations, and they say, no, my house is not covered. So you know, that's where the conversation sometimes breaks down. So do they expect their problems to be solved by this? And if that's the case, then that's what we're going to have to include in our parameters of the intergovernmental agreement. Or the city has to address these people and say, here's who gets their problem solved with this solution.
I mean, from the conceptual drawings, let's take Madison, for example, that it's a short-term solution. So there's short-term solutions that could help some people, and then there's longer-term solutions, which we don't have plans or drawings with any long-term solutions. So that would solve more people's problems, you know, with the longer-term, long-range plans. So we in our communications, we have to show that the use of the Madison field for stormwater is a short-term solution. Go ahead.
The other thing we need to present this as, it is a reallocation of assets to stormwater and away from education. And it's that simple. And so, as I said before, there are short-term reallocation, serving the schools as they exist, but this plan has to address the long-term needs that the district has to meet with its limited resources, including real estate resources, to meet the future educational needs of the kids. And that means when that building is too small and needs an addition, or that building needs to go away, and that land needs to be addressed as an opportunity to address those future needs. That's something that needs to go into this discussion also, is how do we balance that very intensive short-term need for the land to address a stormwater issue and balance that against the long-term needs of education in District 205. And it is an issue of asset allocation is what it comes down to.
Let me summarize again. Tell me if we're getting closer. If we ask the PTAs at this point, and clearly we're going to go back at a later date once we have further plans, what are the key issues that concern you about the temporary storage of stormwater on school property? Are you aware of the ongoing discussion? And how would you like to receive future information on this topic? And then how do we balance the short-term reallocation of resources away from education to short-term stormwater storage? You want to edit that at all? I'm all for a.
I think you
I don't
pretty much-
understand, what are the reallocation, what's being reallocated?
When you have stormwater in a location, you can't put a building there anymore. And when you can't put a building on there, it reduces your opportunities and increases your cost when it comes time to redo that building, realign it, reconfigure it.
Okay, but that's a discussion, like, we haven't even had the discussion, because that's a good question. I mean, that's something I would like answered too. To me, it seems like when we build a new school building, the first thing we do is dig a hole, make a basement. So how big of a deal is it if the land is 3 feet lower? Does that mean you can't build a school building there? Does it mean it's gonna cost us extra money to fill in the hole? Like, those are questions we haven't even answered yet. Isn't
Yeah.
that an easy, can't we
Yeah.
get an answer to that question?
I think we need to talk about those things, and
I mean,
that's
that's not something we go
that's
ask
a
the
later
PTAs.
that's a later discussion. No, I say that just for purposes of framing what the discussion is about.
And John, I mean, just building on what you say, I mean, just at a level higher than this, since it's probably more of a communication issue, but we're talking about facilities here, and we're talking about facilities needs and long-term needs, and it's not just the land that we need to put them on, but the money that we're going to need from the community at some point in time. It's not a secret that we have no money in our capital fund. It's not a secret that Lincoln's 100 years old and Field's right behind it, and Churchville has needs too. And I think as a community, they also need to be aware that there are needs that our school district has that are pretty substantial in the tens of millions of dollars at some point in time over the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully that long, maybe sooner. But when these discussions are being had, we would be remiss if we didn't have our voice heard in the community, and the PTAs are one of the ways to help that understanding occur. So I think that I would add that point. More on the lines of communication and helping frame the issue, to John's point, than anything else.
Specifically, what would that sound like? Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I mean, I don't think you have to do more. I mean, what you have is fine for now. We can start there.
So we're good with those three, start the conversation, see what we get back, perhaps gives us some different perspectives than we may already have, and go from there. Margaret?
And I also, I was wondering what that process or that timeline might want to be, because I know there's a lot of sensitivity, there's a lot of concern out there in our community about this. And I want to be sure that we're being communicative on what our process is and a timeline that they might expect it. We get some information back, and then what the next steps are. So I think this is a great way to take this information to the community. Do we want to draft idea of how quickly we'd get our information back? Do we have a approximate?
The idea would be that the PTAs would have this discussion at this month's PTA meetings. Now, I've gotten a couple of reminder notes that I promised to get these questions, because some of these PTA meetings are going on this week. So, the PTA council would appreciate these questions as quickly as we can get them to them. And then they would bring the results back to the PTA council meeting next month to the board rep who attends that meeting. So whoever that board rep is that you? So bring a sharp pencil. Be taking a bunch of notes. So, and then, then you can report back to us, share those thoughts with us. And I would think the time frame would go something like, let's first get an intergovernmental agreement in place. Let's find out what people's concerns are. Let's get an intergovernmental agreement, and then let's find a test site. And I know the city's proposed 2 of them. And then let's see what those concrete plans looks like for a test site. And we go from there. And then once that test site is constructed, we learn a lot from that. And people, my experience is people pay a lot more attention once it's actually happening than when it's being talked about in conceptual terms. John, go ahead.
I'm not following. What do you mean by a test site?
The first site.
Okay. Because it's not a test. You go in with both feet, and that's why you have all the professional. Because there's a lot of infrastructure that goes in. Here's what's going on. The city's looking for our positive reaction before they start spending design dollars, before they start paying the engineers to do that,
And that's prudent.
that's completely appropriate concern that they don't want to be spending money if they don't know that there's a. At the other hand, we don't approve of unknown, and so there's a discussion that has to take place at what the appropriate level of approval is, considering, as Chris said, there is very little technical information at that time, but they do need the comfort to proceed with this. I'm also a little concerned that we're going into stormwater now when we were supposed to be giving you topics for the PTA councils. And frankly, we're supposed to be about education of the kids. So I'd like to say assessment, 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 and the community input about that, and education of the community about the significant impacts of assessment during this year. And Michelle can probably articulate these things far better than anyone else, and it would be important to have kind of a framework for having that discussion with like everything, needs a framework with appropriate technical, professional, detail, interpretation of the impact. We've talked about it so many times, but it's important to use this discussion on that very important, timely topic, which is real important this year.
In fact, John, I think that's a great idea. Margaret and Emily, as you discuss community forum topics, that you might want to keep that one in mind as a possibility. And Margaret, you're right. Maybe my choice of test site is a poor choice of words. Inaugural site, I'm not exactly sure what the correct term would be, but the very first site that I think we learn a lot. Any other ideas besides assessment? Because going back to these general, I think we've got our questions for the PTA Council regarding stormwater. And that's certainly a topic we can come back to later in the year once we have more details. Emily, do you have?
Well, about the community forum that the PTA Council sponsors in November, I mean, we could ask them what topics they would like to discuss,
Right, and I'll leave that to you and Margaret.
No, I mean, ask the PTAs. That could be one of the questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, excellent idea.
They can do my job for me. Thank you.
No. Okay. We start with those three. I mean, we can revisit this as the year goes along. I think, as I said, I think between finance, operations, and curriculum committees, there'll be all sorts of things that we're thinking about that we want a little more feedback on as the year goes on. Okay, thank you. And then I think we can loop back to bond market update. Elizabeth, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Clicker? Fantastic. Thanks so much. Okay, great. Thanks for having me. Yes, I brought more paper, even though I know you've all got this electronically, but can't get away from it. Okay, I'm here tonight to talk about a bond market update and some of the financing options we've been discussing in the Finance Committee to provide the district with opportunities for savings through refunding bonds. So page 1 is a chart, just when you thought rates couldn't get any lower, they did. And the global uncertainty is kind of driving investors towards treasury bond investments and safe investments. And we have not had glowing economic reports here at home either, which continues, the bad news continues to make interest rates go down. So we're in good shape. The blue line's a 20-year AAA MMD index, municipal market data, and the green line is the 10-year. They move together. The next chart is the yield curve, and the green line is where we are now. This looks at interest rates from years 1 through years 30. And as you can see, the green line is pretty close to the blue line, which represents the lowest we've been in recent history in 2012. So this also tells us that short-term interest rates are still extremely low, and the yield curve is pretty steep in those first 10 years where rates go up. Okay, with regard to the district's outstanding debt service, you have some bonds with call dates coming up. If we just kind of go across the page, we've got the 2013B and the 2013A that we did last year. One was for refunding, and one was for about $1 million of life safety projects. 2012, we did a bank qualified refunding for savings then. And then we've got the 2007 bonds. Those are callable in 2017. If we go to the next page, the 2007 general obligation capital appreciation bonds, those are non-callable, those are non-referendum bonds. But then the 2006A is one bond that's very a good refunding opportunity. The call date there is January 1, 2016, so about a year from now. But the strategy of the district and the Finance Committee has been to take some of these refunding opportunities before the call date in 2012 and 2013 to take advantage of these incredibly low interest rates and take some of the risk off the table of future interest rate risk, issue them as bank qualified, which results in even lower interest rates because of the extra deduction of interest that banks get from purchasing the bonds of small issuers. So if you issue less than $10 million of debt in total in any calendar year, the bonds become bank qualified. So that's kind of been the strategy with refunding pieces of the 2006A bonds in both 2012 and 2013. We're coming up here to the call date on the 2005B bonds. Those bonds are callable January 1, 2015. So that's one of the primary issues I'd like to talk about tonight. The board has the ability to refund that bond within 90 days of that call date on a current basis. So it's also a great refunding opportunity for you. And the recallable bonds will be close to fitting under the bank qualified cap. The 2005A bonds, those are not callable. Going to the next page, we have small pieces left of the 2004A and the 2004 bonds, and then the 2002 bonds go out to 2021, and those bonds have already been refunded. There is no more debt refundable there. Okay, so page 6 is a schedule of the outstanding debt payments. We've got the EAV known for the year 2013, starting on the left side of the page. We don't know what the EAV is going to do in 14 or forward, so we're very conservative in just assuming 0 or 1% growth rate. As you know, we've seen declining EAVs. Hard to say when that will turn around. As the EAV, the assessor looks at the last 3 years of values to determine the next year's EAV, so it's kind of on a rolling average. So even though we might see recovery in the real estate market and things starting to boom, it's not going to be reflected in the EAV for a few years, given that 3-year rolling average. The next column is the debt service extension base, and that's per the tax limitation law, allows you to issue non-referendum bonds such as working cash and life safety. And last year in 2013, we used a portion of that to issue a life safety bond. So all your current non-referendum debt service is in the middle of the page. That matures in 2025 levy year. And then in the green box, that's the remaining capacity for non-referendum bonds. And I think as mentioned earlier in your meeting, it's not a lot of leverage for capital, okay? So it's been tapped in earlier issues, and you know, it really doesn't come available for another 11 years or so. Then the next column is the current referendum bond debt service. So those bond issues we just reviewed and the bond issues sold to refund those are all kind of combined in the current referendum debt service. So that's all voter-approved debt. And that matures in 2024 levy year. Then the current bonded debt service is the combination of both the non-referendum and the referendum. And then finally, we have the current bond and interest tax rate. So that tax rate is currently going up a few cents a year for 2 reasons. 1, the EAV has come down, and 2, the payments in total are going up. And that is due to the structure of the referendum bonds, which were approved by the voters back in 06 and 07, and even prior to that, when the expectation was that growth would continue to be with the district in terms of tax base growth, development, new people moving in, that kind of thing. Of course, when we hit the recession in 2007, that kind of reversed and EAVs went down. So we're still kind of suffering from some of those negative EAVs, but that debt structure was set in place at a different time. The next page puts this in a graphic picture for you. So you can see the dark blue bars at the bottom are the non-referendum debt service payments, and then the lighter blue bars are the referendum payments. The red line relates to the right side of the graph. That's the tax rate. So as you can see, all debt is paid off by 2025, so in just 11 years. It's rather short, but we do have that the shape where the payments are increasing due to the prior structure of the referendum approved bonds. Okay, so this next section, the refunding options, reviews what we've done in 2012 and 2013 with regard to savings already. So in 2012, the savings was about $582,000, and in 2013 it was $1,004,000. So you've already saved almost $1.6 million in interest for the taxpayers. And when we refund bonds for savings, this is direct savings to the taxpayers. So in our discussions at the Finance Committee, we've wanted to be clear as we saw all those call dates coming up, 2015, 2016, and 2017, that in this low interest rate environment, you have some good opportunities. So the best opportunity for refunding bonds is at the call date, but waiting till 2016 and 2017 does incur some interest rate risk. So we want to look at some metrics around that. How much do interest rates have to go up to make us better off to do the refunding now for a little less prior to the call date versus taking the risk that the rates are going to go up in the next 2 to 3 years. So we've got some metrics around that. So based on our committee discussions, we determined a schedule to refund bonds that of course is subject to change, but is based on that same philosophy of taking small pieces of these refundings, if we can bank qualified to get the lower interest rates and take some of the future interest rate risk off the table. So what that results in is this October, looking at a refunding of this first callable piece, which is a current refunding, okay? So that we're doing this at exactly the right time, refunding the 2005B bonds, because again, their call date's Jan 1, 2015. Then looking to perhaps January 15 to refund the remaining advanced refundable portions of the 2006As. Now, the 2006As has a piece of debt within there that was refunding prior issues. That portion can only be refunded at the call date, meaning next January 2016. But the bigger part of it is still advance refundable. So we discuss going ahead to market into January, into the next calendar year or so, depending on market conditions, and going ahead and refunding the 2006A bonds advance refundable piece. Now, just a word on bank qualification. Here in 2014 calendar year, the district has already issued some bank qualified debt, some leases for technology like you typically do every year. So that means we can refund about $8 million of the 2005B bonds still on the bank qualified basis. Whenever you do bank qualified debt, you're committing to the IRS that you are not going to issue any more than $10 million of debt in a calendar year. But 2015 is the next calendar year, right? So that's why we can issue bigger refundings and take advantage of these low interest rates to capitalize on the 2006A, which has, of all your bond issues, well, you know, interest rates in the 5.5%. So it's a really good refunding opportunity compared to our super low interest rates that we have today. Then coming back in October of 2015 and refund the remaining currently callable 2006 bonds that we otherwise could not refund until that time, again within 90 days of the current call date on that smaller piece. So with that type of schedule in mind, let's look at the savings. On page 10, this is the refunding of the 2005B bonds. Now we're refunding about $8.6 million, and the savings is $749,000, $749,000. This is a current refunding. It's wonderful. We have no negative arbitrage, which has to do with setting up that escrow prior to the call date on the bonds. So this is what we're looking at on the 2005B bonds. Maybe even a little better now because rates actually came down last week. The next piece was going to January 15 and going ahead and advance refunding the eligible Series 2006A bonds. That would be about $29.5 million of bonds, and the savings on that would be about $4.6 million, okay? So that's obviously a very strong refunder. The average annual savings is about $467,000. Now, the PV ratio, net present value savings as a percent of the refunded bonds, is 13.6%. We usually like to see that ratio north of 3%. So obviously a very strong ratio that tells us it's a good candidate. The all-in true interest cost on this, about 2.83 versus the average coupon on these bonds, as I mentioned before, 5.5. So we could go ahead in January and do this just to get a feel for the interest rate risk. There's one line on here I want to point out, that negative arbitrage in the box. It's $704,000. What that represents is the cost of taking your refunding bond proceeds and investing it in Treasury securities, which have these super low interest rates, well below the yield on the bonds, and waiting till, which we have to do if we do this in January. So that escrow fund then matures on the call date and pays off all those old bonds. So the cost of that is about we're giving up $704,000. So the question is, looking at our savings, which are $4.6 million, of doing this in January, how much do rates have to go up between now and November of 2015 to make us better off to do this refunding now? And the answer to that question is 43 basis points, or 0.43%. So, think about the Fed and their discussion about raising rates, and they said, what, now the second quarter maybe, if the economy's doing well, maybe not. When the Fed raises rates, they raise them about 0.25%. So, if the economy's doing well, you definitely could see a 0.43% rise in rates till next November. If the economy kind of stays stagnant and we have all this global unrest, maybe we don't see the rates rise, and it's better off to wait and do the whole refunding of the 2006A in November of 2015. So this break even gives us a feel for how much rates have to go up to make us better off to do it now, and I think that's a topic that we'll continue to discuss. It's not a decision you need to make tonight, but I wanted to talk to you about the idea of going ahead and setting that up as early as January, but maybe waiting till the following November. And we'll continue to update the numbers and give the Finance Committee feedback on that. But consistent with your philosophy of taking some of that interest rate risk off the table, this could be likely a very good path for you, given the small, relatively low break even. The next page looks at coming back in November of 2015 and refunding the remaining 2006A bonds that we must wait till November of 15 to refund, because we can't do that in advance of the call date. So the savings on that piece, which is about $12.8 million in bonds, is $2,867,000. So again, very good savings on this piece too. Doing it at the current call date, there's no negative arbitrage. And so if we summarize these refunding savings, this is the present value of each of these pieces. The 2005B in October of 14, the January 2015 advance refunding of the 2006A, the October 2015 refunding of the remaining 2006A, just those three pieces save the taxpayers in present value dollars, all after expenses, of $7.6 million. So you can see that these refunding candidates are very strong for the district. Last but not least, it's out there a ways, but I thought I'd throw this out. The 2007 bonds, as you might recall from the outstanding debt, is callable in January of 2017. So it's hard to say what rates are going to be then, but if rates stay the same, you're looking at another $2 million of savings on that issue. Now that issue cannot be refunded in advance of the call date because the original purpose was to refund prior bonds from 2001 and 2002. So, but good to know that there's that opportunity out there and flexibility for you and savings opportunities in the future. So that's the timing discussion and a review of some of the really nice refunding options you have ahead of you. The next section focuses on the structure of the debt. And through the Finance Committee meetings, we've come up with three ideas to run by you in terms of, should we keep the pattern of the debt the same? Should we accelerate it, or should we stretch it out? And what are the relative savings metrics and tax impacts of those options? So page 15 again looks at just the current situation. You saw this chart before, and you saw this graph before. So we're just repeating, this is the current situation, current structure of the debt. So the goal of restructuring is to change the shape of the debt service pattern. So your outstanding referendum bond debt service payments increase over time annually on average of approximately 5.5% a year. In the next 2 years, the increases in the debt service levy are 9.1% and 8.8%, again, driven primarily by the structure of those referendum bonds, which were issued at a time when tax bases were growing. So option 1 shows a restructuring which keeps the shape of the debt service exactly the same, but accelerates the principal repayment to the extent possible. So we're actually reducing our debt service by the equivalent of 1 year. So this is not a typical option, but it's a very, very financially economical option because you're paying off debt early, okay? Keeping the debt payments the same as they are now, so you still have kind of the increases, but you're paying off principal early. You're saving even more interest than the kind of level debt refunding options we just looked at. Option 2 shows an in-place refunding. So this lowers the debt service by approximately the same amount in each year. So you're just taking level savings, so keeping the shape the same, but just bringing the cost down to the taxpayers by an equal amount every year. And that's about $865,000 a year altogether with these 3 issues, or it's about 4 cents on the tax rate, 4.6 cents on the tax rate. Option 3 is the debt restructure to limit the annual increases. Instead of 5.5% on average, it would go up 2.5% a year until the debt reaches an annual amount of $11.25 million and then just stays level at that amount. So this debt structure in option 3 actually extends the debt by 2 full years. However, because interest rates are so low compared to the time you issued, you still have present value and current interest rate savings. Okay, so I apologize for the small numbers on page 18, but this is option 1. And so we've got it split into the 4 pieces we talked about earlier. The fall 2014 refunding of the 2005 Bs, the early January 2015 refunding of the 2006 As that are advance refundable, then the fall 2015 refunding of the currently refundable portion of the 2006 As, and then out in 2017, or fall of 2016, refunding of the 2007 A bonds. Now, you can see each issue we're paying off less in the last year than we were before, and in fact, in the fall 2015 refunding, we're shortening up a whole year. So I draw your attention to the yellow box versus the pink box. The yellow box is your current debt payment pattern, and the pink box is the revised debt pattern. Okay, so you can see the payments are relatively the same up front, but then they're much lower in the years 2022, 2023, and 2024 levy years. We also look at the current bond and interest tax rate versus the projected tax rate. So in those years where there's those big savings, you can see that tax rate goes down in, for example, 2022 by almost 20 cents. Okay, so those are the big savings years out at the end because we're paying off principal early, saving a ton of interest by doing so. At current interest rates, this series of bonds shows total savings in the bottom right-hand corner of $11.8 million. Again, paying off the debt sooner, but keeping the tax rate pattern relatively the same. So page 19, I think the pictures always work better. The top graph is the current situation. The bottom graph, you can see in 2022, 2023, and 2024, the bars are much lower than they were in the top graph. Now you may say, why didn't we shorten up 2024 more and bring that bar down even farther? Within that debt service is some of the bonds we refunded in 2012, which are callable out in 2022. So it's better to wait if you need to reduce that even further till 2022 to do so. But you can see those two bars, 23 and 24, how much lower they are than the top picture. So that's where most of your savings are. The early bars are pretty much the same as the graph above. We're keeping the debt pattern the same, paying principal off early. So we call that the accelerated debt service schedule. Option 2 looks at these for refundings and structures them so that we're taking level savings kind of each year. So this is where we're saving about, if you look at the tax rate difference, about 4 cents a year on average. It turns into about $680,000 a year, so about 4.6 lower in tax rate. We're not stretching the debt out, we're not shortening it up. We're keeping exactly the same footprint. So you can see on page 21, these shapes look very similar, but if you look closely, you can see that the bars in the lower graph are in fact lower by that $680,000 or so than they are on the top, but the pattern's the same.
I don't know if you did the math or could do the math. I mean, do you know how much that translates to on like tax bills?
We did it in committee.
20 or 30 bucks.
20 or
Thank you,
30
Chris.
bucks
Yep.
for like a house,
300.
300.
For a $350,000 house, it's, the ramp is about 20 or 30 bucks a year, is the,
And how much it goes up?
on the current one.
On the current one, okay.
And so the savings, if you were to keep the same maturity structure, would be somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Option 3, this is where we're changing the shape of the debt. Instead of going up at about 5.5% a year on average in terms of our debt payments, we're limiting that to 2.5%. So we're stretching out, and you can see, if you look at the fall refunding, we're going out 1 year. If you look at the early 2015 refunding, we're going out 2 years, 3 years actually, and then 3 years again in the other 2015 refunding, and 1 year in the 2016. So if you look at the pink box, the projected bond and interest payments, you can see the debt growth is about 2.5% a year. Then when we get to 11,246,000, we just kind of freeze that level of payments and finish out the debt schedule. So we're going out altogether 3 years further than the referendum debt service currently matures. The picture kind of tells the story. As you can see, the bars on the bottom graph are very flat, except for that 2024 year. As I mentioned, we probably don't want to deal with that until the call date a little bit further down the road, just to avoid some costs, but that certainly can be taken care of in a future refunding. But so that's a 2.5 growth structure. And then just to summarize, we've got the current debt service, restructuring option 1, which is the acceleration, restructuring option 2, which is the level savings, and restructuring option 3, which is the stretch out. So you can see how the tax rate is pretty much the same on the first several years in option 1, and then drops dramatically in 22 and 23, or 23 and 24 and 25. Then option 2 is very similar, about 4 cents lower a year. And then option 3 stretches out another couple years past the final maturity. And the different savings. So with the acceleration, option 1, the total savings 11.8. With the restructuring option, it's 10,000,003, and with the stretch out option, there are still positive savings, but they're down to 4.4 million about in that option.
So why would a school district choose the 4 million total savings instead of one of the other two? Is it the shape of that
Yeah.
they like that it's completely flat?
Completely flat to try to reduce the annual payments for the taxpayers. kind of like stretching out your mortgage, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were in committee, we talked about the options being, you're 3 or 4 years into your mortgage, you can refinance your mortgage. Do you refinance into a 15-year mortgage and keep the payments the same and get out of debt quicker and save interest overall? Do you refinance into the same 27-year term that you have left and just pocket the savings? Or do you go ahead and refinance with a 30-year mortgage and lower your payments? You'll pay longer, you'll pay more overall interest, but your current cash outlay would be lower. And so that's kind of the question. You can see how dramatic the difference is. The one on the back end is, every time you get 5 years into a mortgage, you refinance it with another 30-year mortgage, and you never quite pay off your house, but your payments stay low, but they go for a long time. And one of the other issues that we talked about here too was from a debt service perspective. We talked earlier about the capital needs of the district, and I guess I'll jump in. My personal preference is to get out of debt sooner, and free up the back end of our maturity structure so that if we were to have to issue bonds at some point in time for capital improvement, we'd have created the room so that the blow to the taxpayer is lessened. So that's the one thing that's not in here. We're talking about refinancing with a static set of debt. But if we were to need money to invest, the question is where does that come from? That would be additional levy on top of what's there, unless we can save some money by accelerating the maturities a little bit, freeing up some room in the back end of our bond schedule. And then that way the impact on the taxpayer would be mitigated somewhat. So I'm sorry if that gets dense. You can ask questions. But so we had asked her to look at the three of them. I think overall, keeping the payment the same and refinancing it into a shorter maturity saves the taxpayer the most money, and that was my personal recommendation. So.
Yeah, and that was, I agreed with that in the committee and actually came to the meeting with that in mind, only because if it were larger numbers, it would make more sense.
Go ahead.
Karen, I think you mean that if the taxpayer as an individual was going to see a bigger savings than the $20 or $30, then we would have more incentive to go with one of the other options. Is that what you mean?
That's exactly what I mean. And in the long term, it gets us out of this huge structure at the end where we're paying a lot of interest on the bonds. And that's what we didn't like when we came on the board that we saw, and we've been trying to work on it ever since. So this continues that philosophy. And now we even have more data that says it's minimal dollars to the taxpayer. So it makes sense to me.
If I can just add one more thing to the discussion. In terms of what we're going to refinance when, we could come back and look at this every year for the next 3 years. However, for Elizabeth to go back and do all the work to figure out what a new term structure would look like, which are our three options, it's better if we decide upon our schedule of refinancing now, so as Elizabeth's firm calculates exactly what we should be repaying in what year, and if we choose the flattening out the option, then it's better if we approve it kind of as a package today, so that Elizabeth knows how to structure the term of the bonds.
Yeah, I think what we need to understand is which one of these options that we want to do. It will impact the maturity schedule of everything we refund from here on out. So what Jim's saying is we have two decisions to make tonight. Number one is which option and which term structure when we get to the second decision, which is which bonds to refund when. Right now, today, the two decisions are: do we go ahead and authorize a parameters resolution to do the October bank qualified deal? The bigger savings is January, and we can intend to do that, but we're not locking in. We don't have to vote on anything now to do that. We would come back in January and look at rates and decide again. You get another chance to look at this before we pull the trigger on that. But right now, we need a parameters resolution to get things ready for October. and so once you agree to do that, then you have to tell Elizabeth what term structure she should use in that refunding. And I think if we use this accelerated schedule, she would then structure the bonds to keep the payments the same, but to pay off the debt quicker. And then we would use that strategy, then the intention would be to use that strategy then in January, and then again in October, and then again the following year. That doesn't say that you're locked into it, but that would be a commitment that I think we would like to make, but we're not locking future boards into that if they were to change their mind. But once you refinance these bonds now, if you were to refinance them out into a longer term, future boards can't change that. So we have to pick it now, I think, from our strategy perspective and then revisit it. But we pretty much want to know where we're going from a structure standpoint. So those are the two things. Do we have consensus on the structure we want to use? And then two, or do we have consensus that we want to go ahead and do a bank qualified deal in October, and then we need to go through this parameters resolution to get that all. And it's similar to the other ones we've done in the past.
Go ahead.
The bank qualified deal, that's for bonds that are callable anyway, so
Right.
that makes perfect sense. I mean, we're not even advancing anything with that.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
If I can put my 2 cents in terms of timing, that this is unfortunately my career. I would encourage us to refinance as much as we can, as early as we can. Just in the question number one in terms of timing. For all sorts of technical issues, the government is phasing out their purchase of U.S. Treasuries and mortgage securities every month. That program is projected to end in October of this year. So without the government with their, I'll use the term, artificial support to the bond market, rates would naturally, you would expect to rise. Less demand, more supply. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, the current thinking in the market is that the Fed will begin to raise rates somewhere in the time frame of about 6 months after this QE program runs out in October or is phased out in October. So when you look at the break even, it's only 43 basis points. The previous Fed chairman used to like to raise rates or lower rates in 25 basis point increments. That doesn't necessarily predict what Chairman Yellen will do. But, it's, even if it's 25 basis points per rate increase, that could be 2 months worth of rate increases. And you're better off to finance as much as you can as early as you can. That would be my personal recommendation. I kind of frame all this in, if it's my checkbook, what would I do? That's what I would do if it was my checkbook. And the second question that we have to answer, if I had the opportunity to keep my payment low and save $4.3 million, or keep my payment lower than is currently projected and save $11.8 million, I think I'd rather save the $11.8 million. Now, there's one more thing that you could throw onto that. And that is no expectation of any major construction project, between now and the beginning of it, between now and 10 years from now. I mean, frankly, again, if it were my money and I was anticipating building something, I'd borrow that money right now and build something as soon as I can, because, again, rates may continue to decrease, but right now the bias looks like they go up before they go down. With that said, since we have no certain plans to borrow a bunch of money to build something, I would go with let's save as much money as we can now. If that sentiment were to change, you might actually be better off with the restructuring where you stretch it out so you can borrow more on top of it and keep the taxpayer payment a little lower and a little more level. So that's my 2 cents. Elizabeth, what would help you from for us to give you some direction tonight?
It would be very helpful if, we've had good discussion on these options 1, 2, 3. I think I see nodding heads and most people thinking maybe option 1, the acceleration, is in fact the best savings, the biggest bang for the buck. So if you're willing to give me that direction, I would be very pleased, because as Chris said, it does set the structure for each subsequent bond issue. And then also direction to come back to you on September 23rd with a parameters refunding resolution for the 2005B bank qualified piece, because that is currently refundable, obviously good savings. So the time is right to do that one.
So let's take it as two questions. The first for Elizabeth, should she come back with a parameters resolution at our next meeting that we can vote on to refund the bank qualified portion when the market presents the opportunity, as soon as October?
Right.
Yes? Okay, we have consensus there. They're not that I can perceive, right? So question number 2 is, of the 3 options presented, which do we feel is better for the taxpayers of District 205 in terms of restructuring the payment schedule and the amount of savings generated by each, which you see on the screen at the moment? Number 1, 2, or 3? We could, let's hope we're not playing rock, paper, scissors with this decision, but, right, got it. 1, anyone? We got 7 ones, so let's not go through 2 and 3, all right?
Okay.
Elizabeth, I think you've got some
Fantastic.
direction.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Elizabeth, and also thank you to the hardworking folks who run and attend the Finance Committee, attended on a regular basis, even as members, who gave us very good professional guidance on this very complex issue. Thank you to you guys for quarterbacking that.
Again, Elizabeth, thank you very much for all your time and all your evenings that you've spent with us. All right. Yeah, you're right. That is the ground. That is the setup for a bad joke, right? All right. Next is superintendent's Oh no, I'm sorry. We're at board committee reports. I'm sorry. Board Improvement Committee, our meeting at committee of the whole. Chris Bloom was the only person that wasn't there. Do we need to summarize that? Okay. Right. Right. So rather than spend a lot of time on it, is there any follow-up? I know we were going to compare calendars to schedule a follow-up meeting, which I think Dave will have Ellen send out a note to find out a common date when we can all get together and finish that meeting. By the way, we ended that meeting early because it happened to be curriculum night at York. And we had several high school parents on the board that wanted to get to curriculum night, me being one of those. And anything else that came out of that meeting that we need to follow up on?
I had one.
Go ahead.
Okay. As far as, or maybe you're going to talk about this later, I don't know, the communication around the Harris survey results. Is that the right place to talk about it, right here? Okay. We were going to send out the results from all of the input we received from last year's lunches with our teachers, and send a cover letter with that. So that's good. I'm glad we're doing that. But after that step, we talked about having a document that shows some changes that we've made in our district based on that feedback, showing progress, that we heard you, we heard our staff, we listened, and we're making some changes. how do we structure that, or how, how do we go about doing that communication and that work? Maybe that's going to happen in the follow-up meeting.
I think we can plan for that in the follow-up meeting, and one thing we should discuss, and we got a lot of valuable feedback from the brown bag lunches that we all attended last year. The other thing we need to decide, are we going to continue that? Are we going to have another round this year? Personally, I felt they were valuable. Karen, go ahead.
I thought we talked about at this retreat that's exactly what we're going to do, is we would have the brown bags at each year. And what we're trying to do is be structured to improve employee satisfaction as it relates to the board, the employee feedback to the board on the Harris survey. So we want to really make sure that we're clear on this process. It's really twofold, right? We want to improve employee satisfaction with us, build the team, work through issues that they have. And that's what was highlighted in this feedback. That's what we're supposed to take to each one of the schools. And so that's what we want to continue to do, okay? So that's primary, because then we can measure our success, and we can look at where we can achieve the highest impact or performance satisfaction from our employees if we use that process. And that's why we use that structured process going into those brown bags this past year, and we'd like to use that moving forward, okay? The second piece is, as we do these brown bags and as we work with the school liaison program and the boards go to the schools, we are open to hearing all kinds of things, okay? So that's a second piece of it. But we don't want to lose sight of the structured process of increasing employee satisfaction as it relates to our investment with the Harris survey that the whole district is doing, and we as a board said that we would embark upon as well. So I hope that kind of frames it for everyone of, there's two things that you're doing in those meetings. So to Shannon's point, when we go in this year, we will want to provide the feedback and talk about either the structured document of the progress that we've made, as well as we talked about either, focus, direction, goals, which we have consistently heard not only from employees, but from the community. And that's the other phase of the Harris, that we got parent feedback that we'll have to incorporate into like the PTA councils, if you will. But that was the second phase for how we were embarking upon the Harris survey progress. So, so with that, I think what you're talking about, Shannon, is more around the feedback that we received specifically to the Harris survey, and how do we move that forward?
I think, let me just summarize. So when we go back to the schools, we will have our communication, a consistent communication, and then open the discussion up also, like give the staff a chance.
Right.
After we have our communication piece, still have time to, do more of a casual conversation and get, additional feedback. Right. Okay. Okay.
John?
What kind of preparation is there of that piece? Because I found October a very advantageous time to make a connection with the teachers, and it helps make the best use of the school year when you develop those relationships early enough with them. And so I was looking at scheduling for October, but if this communications piece isn't ready, I don't want to get out in front of it.
Karen and Emily are very close to having, and Malia are very close to having a letter to send out to the staff that summarizes, what we're talking about in terms of the Harris results and the feedback that we garnered last year. And then I guess it all depends upon when we can have this follow-up meeting to the one that was truncated. I don't think an October timeframe is out of the question at all.
Are we also planning sending 2 board members to each school the way we did last year?
Let's discuss that at the follow-up meeting. As we need to be conscious of everyone's time. I like the two sets of eyes and ears there, but I think we have to survey people's time availability as well in the middle of the day. So, anything else? Should we move on to finance and operations? Chris?
All right, this is quick. The lion's share of the time was spent on the bond market options, which we just went through.
You go through them again for us?
Okay, so you got three. No. We talked about July monthly financial reports, which was the first month of the fiscal year, so there's really not much to report. And then I saw, Chris, do you want to talk about the nurse agreement? I see this on the agenda tonight for approval. Do we want to say anything?
Why don't we wait till we have a motion and we can just discuss that agreement?
Okay, so I'll defer that till then.
Yeah.
And then there were just a couple updates. We're talking about just getting our ducks in a row with respect to when PMA is going to give us another set of the 5-year projections in conjunction with our budget cycle, which will be coming up in the future. And then from the demographer standpoint, that was just talking about where we go, and it sounds like we have to finish the meeting from the 27th anyway. So that was pretty much it.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's consent agenda with one item on it. So if I can have a motion, we can then discuss it. Not all at once. John, you had your hand up. You're it.
I move that the Board of Education approve the superintendent's consent agenda on item A, approval of school nurse agreement with Elmhurst Memorial Hospital.
Do I hear a second? Emily, moved by John, seconded by Emily. Any discussion? Should we ask for just a quick explanation? Sounds like costs are going up a little. We're hiring a few extra people, and it still seems to be the best available option out there.
You summarized it, good. We're done.
There we go.
Just a detail. There are 2 increases overall in staffing in this contract. One is represented by another part-time certified school nurse. The certified school nurse is specific. We have nurses that are registered nurses, and we have certified school nurses, just so the board understands the difference. Under IEPCs, 504s, anything that requires an accommodation for a student, and it is of medical nature, we need a certified school nurse to be at those meetings and be part of that determination. As we went through last year, because of the number of students who have medical issues that require either a 504 IEP or an IDA intervention, we have a greater and greater demand to have those certified school nurses on site to handle those things and to oversee the programs that we institute for medically fragile students. And so we thought it was a good idea and a necessity to add a 0.5 FTE of a certified school nurse for the district. The second one is a substitute flex nurse. Last year, when we were short nurses, when nurses either called in sick, had other meetings, had conflicts, we were actually contracting outside to fill those positions. That was a very expensive option. To go and contract nurses on a part-time basis on call is an expensive proposition. So we decided as a cost-saving measure to add a 0.5 flexible school nurse assistant that would flow throughout the district and cover a variety of issues, primarily substituting for nurses that were calling in sick on a regular basis. Probably the biggest increase in this contract is an evaluation by Edgewood Hospital of the actual contract itself and the personnel costs that they were incurring on this contract. And so they, for the first time this year, asked and put in a $70,000 administrative cost retainer on this contract. And I met with them, Kathy Kostick met with the Elmhurst president, and had an explanation of those costs. They're mainly personnel, human resource issues. They were not charging us in the past. This is still, according to Elmhurst Edwards Hospital, not a for-profit proposition for them. They still lose money on this contract, but they couldn't afford to lose the kind of funding they were having by having the contract last year. So that is what the changes are in the contract that's before you this evening.
An even better summary, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, then I'll turn it over to Mrs. Walsh.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Bastido?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays, that motion passes. Next on our agenda is 2 more action items that are both donations to York High School. So I have a motion for item A, please. Emily, go ahead.
I move that the Board of Education approve the donation from Elmhurst Rotary in the amount of $1,000. This donation is accepted in accordance with policy number 8:80, gifts to the district.
And a second? Second. All right. Moved by Emily, seconded by Shannon. The $1,000 from the Elmhurst Rotary is to help fund the students' costs to participate in the J. Kyle Braid Leadership Program, which have been found to be a highly effective program and an excellent experience for the students at York High School. So we are very appreciative to the Elmhurst Rotary for helping fund our J. Kyle Braid Leadership Program. Any further discussion? Then all we need is a voice vote on this. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Then donation number 2, also to York High School, can I have a motion? Emily?
I move that the Board of Education approve the donation of girls' basketball uniforms from Elmhurst Airborne in an amount not to exceed $2,500. This donation is accepted in accordance with policy number 8:80, gifts to the district.
A second? Thank you, Margaret. Moved by Emily, seconded by Margaret. And again, thank you to the Elmhurst Airborne. We put these on the agenda separately because we do want to acknowledge the generous members of our community that donate to our schools. And my understanding is there is, as it's worded, a strong need for these uniforms. So we truly appreciate it. Any other discussion? Then, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. A review of upcoming meetings. Tuesday, September 16th, the Finance and Operations Committee meets at 6:30 in this room. Wednesday, September 17th, the Policy Committee meets in this room at 7 p.m. Thursday, September 18th, the Performance Management Committee meets at 7 p.m. in this room. And then our next regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting is Tuesday, September 23rd at 7:30 p.m. In this room. Next on our agenda is action items from closed session. There actually were none. And that leads us to board communications. Anything that we didn't discuss earlier? John?
Not to go back to stormwater too much, but one thing that we needed to discuss was a way of getting board members' input to bring back to these stormwater discussions with the city. And it was thought that it might be a good idea to bring it to the Finance and Operations Committee for some discussion. And should enough board members feel it, they want to get involved in those discussions. I know if Shannon and I are going to go with Dave to discuss these things with the city, we should be at that meeting, and that brings the total to 5. If the other 2 don't want to feel left out and come and join us and add their views on stormwater, we should definitely consider doing this as a committee of the whole to discuss. There are the impacts of the city's proposal from a design perspective. How's it going to work? How's it going to impact what we do? What sort of things will we need to do differently? And then there are the business points that we need to get a sense of what the board feels about the business points, addressing, as I said, a reallocation of resources. You need to put burdens on different parties. The 3 or perhaps 4 conditions that you've articulated, I think, are probably fairly common to board members, but I think we need to know that through a direct conversation. And, you know, how does this intergovernmental agreement look in our eyes in such a way that we can help meet an important need in the community in the stormwater thing, an immediate need, but hopefully a temporary need if the city's got a program. But then certainly do it in such a way that it doesn't put the district in a very difficult position using its resources later for the reconfiguration of educational facilities to meet the needs of the kids as the district grows. So there's some, I know we as committee members feel like we'd love to have more direction from, you know, feel like we're carrying out the express will of the board when we're out there. I thought the Finance and Operations Committee might be a good place to have those more detailed conversations.
Well, let's take that point, and just get feedback from the board. You're right. If you brought it to Finance and Operations, essentially you're covering 5 people. And then you got 2 people who weren't there, unless you make all those committee of a whole, and then you're making the entire Finance and Operations Committee a committee of the whole. Would it be best to bring it to the Finance and Operations Committee, or would it be best just to, you know, either under board communications or essentially a standing item on every agenda to have a stormwater update from you, John, and from Shannon? As you attend these meetings, you can just update us and get our feedback. How does the board feel is better approached?
I actually would prefer the second option because, again, I think this will, and I'm speaking for the Finance Committee, but I think this will take away from what their intended objectives are. And if it's going to be a committee of the whole discussion, then let's just keep it as a committee of the whole at one of our standing meetings.
Issue is they wanted feedback sooner rather than later. You know, we'd have to wait till September 23rd to give feedback on the Okay.
Didn't the city in the letter to us have a date that they wanted an answer by? Is that still?
They asked that we have an answer by September 30th. That's their imposed deadline.
The letter was sent 2 days after our August meeting, so when it really wasn't, the date in their meeting doesn't mean too much when it came after our last meeting.
Right. And I wanted to comment, that's why I think it was important for us. They had a suggested timeline, and I think it's important for us to have what our timeline will be so we can be communicative with them. And I think when you outlined the proposed timeline that we talked about getting feedback from the community and this intergovernmental agreement. So I think those put that naturally pushes it out significantly past that September 30th timeframe. But we can now share what the ideal would be for our group.
John?
The deadline simply was one that the city raised to find a general concurrence that we're willing to go down the road and that they have enough confidence to authorize their design consultants to take the concept plan and take it to the next step. I think I hear most board members, but perhaps we need to hear the consensus is, do we want to tell the city, yes, we feel from what we've seen in the concept that there's a strong possibility we can make a deal that looks kind of like your plan, and go ahead, spend the design money so that we know the impact that your project will have on our needs and operations, and we can start to discuss those as we work a intergovernmental agreement. I mean, there was some discussion the other morning about which comes first, the design discussion or the agreement discussion. Well, when we're talking about future plans for our facilities that are still a little bit up in the air because we're at the beginning of a process to formulate a capital plan, I think you have to do both together, and you have to discuss the terms of the intergovernmental agreement while you're also looking at the level of detail that you have in their concept or lack of detail, and work on that at the same time. So you got to kind of do both together.
Margaret, looks
So,
like.
can I get a what are they requesting for on the September 30th deadline? I mean, and I need to be clear on what they're asking.
It's unclear both in terms, well, there's a concept out there. We saw it in May of 2013, and I don't think it's been amended since May of 2013, has it, Chris? And the comments that you provided, you and Shannon provided at earlier meetings, haven't generated a subsequent concept or a more detailed plan that takes it to a next level of design. I think what they're looking for is, when we see something that we could do, and we suggest, yes, that you go ahead and instruct your designers to go ahead and do the project, and let's continue to talk, and we'll continue to present the interests of the school board in that, of the school district and the school kids in that discussion as the design progresses. The Park District is very deep into design process right now. They're already, making suggestions and requests that alter the overland flow of water. I mean, they're at a far greater level of design at that point, and that's probably, well, it's not probably, it is the result of the city deciding that York Commons was highest priority and took that element of their project to the next level before they've decided to do Madison or Jackson or Bryan. And so that's why they're there. And what they're asking us is, will you go through that process with us? I think that's what they're asking. Do you want to put in?
I think you go back, I think you articulated 4 or 5 points that you needed in either an intergovernmental agreement or a design. I don't feel we should be involved in designing and getting involved in the design of these structures. I disagree a little bit with the Park District. I don't think you use tax dollars to do this. This is educational dollars earmarked for education. Do you really want to get into hiring engineers to do a counter design, all of that? I think my suggestion to the board would be you go back to those 4 or 5, get consensus that those are the 5 key concepts that you have to have in any kind of agreement and any kind of design, and then go back and look at those designs and take Madison and say, what part of this design do we think does not meet one of those parameters? And if that's the case, you feed that back to the city and say, here's your design, here's our 5 key points that we have to have. This one on this design is a concern for us. We would like you to rework that because it doesn't reflect what we think we need on that design. Now, most of ours, I think, are going to be reflected in the intergovernmental agreement more than anything else, but I think a key piece would be that we said we need to reclaim the land. So at that point, you ask the city, how is that done? Please spell out specifically, if we pull the plug and say we need the land back, what is the process that's going to happen with that design that allows us to do that? And put that back on them. That would be my suggestion. And it goes back to Chris's kind of the term sheet. Get the terms down first, turn it back to them, and say, okay, now give us your response.
I agree. Our participation in design is just to the extent it impacts our use of the land. for educational purposes. We don't, it's not our determination whether the thing works as a good stormwater facility or not. It's how does it impact our use of the land, and that's what I was trying to
Yeah, and that's part of
articulate.
what you've said.
The
That's
other
part of your
thing that
point.
I wanted to bring up here is this is a stormwater project they're proposing. And you're 100% right, Dave. I'm not exactly sure why we should be taking our tax dollars, which are designated for education, and reallocating those to stormwater. I'm wondering if the, and this is fairly common in certain scenarios, I'm wondering if the proposer of this project, the proposer that wants to use our land without compensation, would consider funding our professional review costs needed to accept a proposal. In other words, we shouldn't be spending money on engineers, and we certainly shouldn't be spending them on lawyers when it is at the expense of educational expenses. They are the body that's responsible for stormwater management, and we're willing to help out to the extent we can without significant or substantial detriment to our mission, which of educating kids. And I think they should, if they're asking for an allocation without compensation, they should pick up those costs. And that would be something that I would suggest for addition to the intergovernmental agreement. It's common when you come into the city with a plan and you have a detention facility in there, you pay the city to review your plans because you're the one that wants it on your property. Same thing here. They want to put something on our property, they should pay for us to give it the appropriate professional review so that we're doing our due diligence with respect to our resources.
I think that's an excellent point. Chris had something, then Margaret.
And I guess I want to take it back to try to understand what they're looking for. And I tried to craft something here, a question. Is the question that they're looking for by September 30th is that the school district is willing to work with them to consider a more in-depth plan/design? Is that their only question?
Go ahead.
I was going to, so in reading the letter, there's two things. Number one, I don't know what exactly they're asking for. It sounds like they're asking for permission to come build something on our lands. Yeah, and I had the letter here on a proposal which is undefined. And so they've asked us to vote to approve their proposal lowercase p undefined. Here, I'm saying what we can do. We vote on, the only thing I think we can vote on is an intergovernmental agreement with a plan attached to it describing what it is they're going to do. Okay, that's what we vote on. So let's just be clear that that's what we have to get to. That said, I think in response to the letter, I would propose and move that we vote to empower John and Shannon, and with coming back to us, to go ahead and with the negotiation of an intergovernmental agreement and the requisite design plans that go with it. We will be good partners and continue to cooperate. All we're voting is to basically do what we've been doing for over a year. In response to their letter, I would suggest sending back a response that says, yes, we approve collaboration and cooperation like we have been doing, with the goal of developing an intergovernmental agreement and a detailed plan and spec that then will be presented to our board for final approval. I think that is where we're at right now in a response. Does that make sense?
I think it is. Emily, you had something? No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with Chris that, what we would vote on would be something more detailed. If we were going to either hire or demand that the city hire an alternate engineering plan or whatever, John, you mentioned that you said they should have to pay for. I would like to discuss that more because I think as a person who lives in Elmhurst, whether the city pays for that or the school pays for it, it's coming out of my pocket. And so before we went to that extreme, like the park district's doing, we're hiring an engineer to come up with alternative plans. I just would like to talk more about that because if it's not necessary, I don't think we should do it. I think, but I agree with what Chris said about what we're going to vote on is going to be something more detailed.
The only alternate perspective I would give you on that is Yeah, as a taxpayer of Elmhurst, I'm writing a check, and it's all going to various governmental agencies, the school district, the park district, the library, the city. However, as, you know, we were all elected to be stewards of the school district, and if my choice is hiring an engineering firm versus hiring a teacher, I'll hire the teacher. So I agree with Dave. I don't want to spend school district resources on things that are not our mission. As John says, the city is asking to use taxpayer, school district land without compensation. So I think it is reasonable that if we need more information to make a good decision on behalf of the students and taxpayers of District 205, that we not bear the burden of incurring the cost, unless the city would like to change their plan and offer us some compensation for the use of school district property, because the city's other choice is to buy land. So I want this to be the most economical and practical solution for the taxpayers of Elmhurst. But I don't want to do it at the expense of our community's children's education.
I'm saying if they paid us, it would be profitable then for us, right? What, I mean, I understood from the beginning this would be no expense to us.
Well, and that's what we're trying to set up rules to make sure that it would be no expense to us. But certainly hiring an engineering firm to review a plan to make sure that it does what it says it's going to do. I mean, there's two ways to achieve that. You can hire the engineering firm to check it and get an outside opinion, which costs money. Or in some cases, you might be able to do that through good liquidated damages clause in a intergovernmental agreement. John disagrees with that, and John has more expertise in this area than I do. So
I don't think liquidated damages is a substitute for engineering review. We need to know on the front end that this is going to work for the purposes for which we use our land, and not try to be compensated later after, you know, there's some disappointment.
Then
And
yeah.
it's just good stewardship of taxpayer resources to examine their plan before we agree to it. That's just ordinary, normal, professional practice that needs to be observed in the use of facilities.
Well, here would be my suggestion then. John has written a rough draft of a resolution that just states several of the things we've talked about tonight. I would like to ask John to go back, review that document, send it to Dave, have Dave send it to the board for further comment. And then once we have something we can agree to vote on, let's bring it to the September 23rd meeting and vote on that resolution. John, I also think walking in tonight, my suggestion would be that we figure out the intergovernmental agreement first. But I think you have a good point that if we have a site that simultaneously we are working through the engineering details, that may bring up a lot of points that we would want to include in the intergovernmental agreement that maybe we didn't realize without the exercise of going through a particular site plan. My suggestion would be, let's take the site plan that we're furthest down the road, which is the playground at Madison, or I should say the field at Madison as opposed to the playground. I guess those are two different areas. And use that to walk through the exercise of going through the engineering, because you bring up a good point. The reimbursement of expenses that we incur by having the plan reviewed shouldn't come out of educational dollars. Margaret?
If we are going to look at reviewing a resolution in that September 23rd meeting, does that not negate the idea of going back to the council, to the PTA council, and asking them their input on the key issues that concern them?
No, not at all, because I think we get that. What we'll be agreeing to do is to move forward on a site plan and an intergovernmental agreement. To get the community's feedback in terms of what their concerns are will be extremely useful in negotiating that intergovernmental agreement and the engineering plans site by site.
Okay, so what, I guess, I'm trying to understand, so what John's coming back with is just a vote that we are in agreement to move forward with. To, as we have in the past, to continue with our collaboration on both the plan and the intergovernment agreement. That's what John's coming back with.
My interpretation of the city's letter was they were looking for some affirmation that we're willing to continue to move forward with them. So let's give them that affirmation.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It was actually stronger language than that, but I agree with what our plan is. And Dave, the city manager sent an intergovernmental agreement from their side, a draft intergovernmental agreement. Can we send that to the board members? Or maybe you have. Did you receive a draft IGA from the city? Okay, so we'll just, if you can send that. The city sent a draft intergovernmental agreement. We can build off of that. I mean, we could build our own terms and, put the two documents together. So that document is out there, so I'd like the board to see it.
Suggestion, Dave brought this up before, just from a layman's term, it's always easier from a business perspective to negotiate from a term sheet rather than a legal document. I mean, rather than getting into the mechanics of how this works with John, and you guys are experts at that, I'm not. If there could just be a summary of the key operational terms of that so that we can just use that.
It's just, this is just a 3-page, a couple of pages that I just want the board to have because it has been sent out to John. You have a copy of it. So I just wanted the whole board to see that, just have it. Doesn't mean we have to work from it, just so we all have the same document.
It's a pretty conventional document for this type of intergovernmental agreement. It's got a real estate component, it's got a design approval component, it's got a cooperation component, and you enhance those things as you move forward. I think probably I think it would be more distracting to send that around. I think what might be better is to send around a term sheet. It's basically going to be the same structure of what was sent, but it'll allow people to focus more on the concepts they're negotiating rather than to get bogged down in the language, because it is all the finished legal language of an agreement, and we're not there yet, what we need to do. Now, professionals don't get distracted. They just say, oh, the deal point there is missing, the deal points there is missing. But I think what we need to do is probably have a term sheet with deal points on it and work through that, and then it's a professional exercise to drop those things into the city's draft.
Yeah, I agree, but to add to a term sheet that IGA helps give you ideas on what would be on your term sheet. So it's just more information, background information.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I mean,
Yeah,
if it's out there,
right.
Okay.
why can't we see
Yeah,
it?
there's
Exactly.
Circulate both.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with passing that around. Now, I also agree with the term sheet concept. So, what is going to be our plan to convert that into an initial term sheet, overlay our terms, and then discuss it?
I don't know what somehow we've got to assemble the ideas. We're going to put a term sheet in people's hands and put the city's draft of the intergovernmental agreement in people's hands, and what's the best way to communicate comments back. We could, in 2 weeks, have a similar discussion like this, and people could bring their thoughts. At the same time, we really haven't had an update of the concept plan they brought in May of 2013, so I don't know that, maybe people have more comments for that. I don't know. But I mean, what's our method for doing that? Do we just do this during communications again next time, or?
Well, I think if we could have some, again, if we had a method to begin a term sheet, and maybe we hire a professional to do that. Maybe we hire an attorney to do that. No, Chris is shaking his head no.
That means he wants to do it.
Okay, do I hear that as a volunteer that Chris is going to convert that? All right, somebody's got to do it. So,
Okay, John, you can do it.
I hear a lot of support for John right now.
Yeah, no, I'll take it on myself to assemble the comments from the different board members and from staff, and try to integrate that into a comprehensive term sheet that we all kind of take a look at and nod at certain point and bring back to the city.
And I also think it's important that we bring that document in the form of a public document that people can see and send their comments to us as well. Maybe we do that at the September 23rd meeting, have it published as part of the, part of the public part of the agenda. Can we do it in that timeframe?
Yeah, if I have comments, I'll put it together
Perfect.
and
Thank you.
get it. And it's got to be available Thursday for publication with the
Is that-
agenda.
Is that the deadline? Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to have to ask the board members to turn their comments around so that we can have something to discuss in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the good news is you have a week from Thursday. It's not this Thursday.
Right. I've got a day job.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about those. All right, so we're good with that. Move forward. We have a plan in place. Wonderful. All right. Anything else for board communications?
I have one thing.
All right.
I just wanted to pass around our school liaison guidelines, which were developed a couple of years ago. And there's a repository, a school board repository folder, it's public. Under the library, there's board member documents, and I went through there, and there's quite a lot of information about legislative, under board docs, in the library. I think this is valuable, under library, board member documents. There's a couple of folders under, and it's under public. Yeah, sure, thank you. So anyway, I just printed out this school liaison program guidelines, just as we're kicking off the school year.
Thank you.
And that's all I had.
Anything else? We're at that point in the agenda where there's nothing left, so this meeting is adjourned.